Hi everybody. Today we are going to talk about section 5.4 in your book, which starts on page 183. The title in your book is Graphing General Quadratic Functions. And basically what we'll be doing is putting functions into work form if they're not already in work form. So let's look at the function y equals x squared plus 6x minus 7. This is in work form. In work form, we would have something in the form of y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, but it's not in that form, so it becomes a problem. We have to put it in work form, and to put it in work form, we have to complete the square, which is something that we learned back in a previous chapter. We're going to go ahead and apply that knowledge. So, in case you have forgotten how to complete the square, I'm going to go ahead and go over the steps. Step 1, we are going to put the x squared term and the x term in parentheses. Step 2, we are going to take half of the b value, which is the number right before the x, and square that number. And then we're going to add this number, the half of b squared, inside the parentheses. Then we're going to subtract it outside the parentheses. Step 4, we are going to factor inside the parentheses. It is going to form a perfect square for us. And step 5, we're going to simplify as necessary. So let's go ahead and look at an example of what this is going to look like. This x squared minus 6x plus 9, that's a perfect square, right? A perfect squared. So x squared minus 6x plus 9 factors into x minus 3 times x minus 3, which we just say is x minus 3 squared. Okay? Now the last step is to simplify. So 4 minus 9 becomes negative 5. And now I have an equation in work form. If you notice, I have my h value here and I have my k value here. So now I can figure out, how does it open? Well, if my new equation in work form is y equals x minus 3 squared minus 5, I have an a value of that imaginary 1, which is positive, which means that my parabola is going to open up. And that means if it's opening up, it also means that it's going to be a minimum point. And my vertex, which I get from my hk value, is going to be 3, negative 5. 3, negative 5. My line of symmetry is going to be whatever my h value is. Since my h value is 3, that means that my line of symmetry will be x equals 3. Alright, so I would like you to go ahead and pause the video now and try this problem on your own. You're going to try y is equal to x squared minus 8x minus 2. Go ahead and use the steps and use the example that I just did to help you. And these are your choices here. You have option 1, 2, 3, 4, or none of the above. One of these is going to be the correct answer. So go ahead and work it out and select which one you think the answer is. Okay, so you should have gotten the answer to y is equal to x minus 4 squared minus 18, which makes sense because half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16, which means that you would have been subtracting 16, and negative 2 minus 16 is negative 18. And of course, x squared minus 8x plus 16 factors into x minus 4 squared. Okay, so here's another example. Y is equal to x squared minus 10x plus 21. Go ahead and pause the video again, and I want you to work this one out on your own and see if you can get the correct answer. So go ahead and pause now and work it out. All right, let's see what the answer is. It looks like the answer is option 1. y is equal to x minus 5 squared minus 4, which makes sense because half of 10 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So you'd be doing 21 minus 25, which would get you negative 4. And then, of course, x squared minus 10x plus 25. If you factor that, you end up with the x minus 5 squared. All right, another problem for you to practice on. Y is equal to x squared minus 4x minus 2. So if you will go ahead and work that out using the steps, make sure that you indicate what you're doing and which step you're working on and show all the steps that you're working on. So go ahead and pause the video and try this now and see if you can get the right answer. All right, so the answer should have been option 2, which is y equals x minus 2 squared minus 6. So you would be taking half of 4, which is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So you would be subtracting 4 from negative 2. So negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. And then, of course, x squared minus 4x plus 4, if you factor that, you end up with x minus 2 squared. Here is another example for you to work on. Y is equal to x squared minus 12x plus 15. So go ahead and pause the video and work this problem on your own and see if you can't get an answer. When I grade your notes, I am going to be looking to see if you attempted the steps for this problem. So make sure you're attempting all the steps and trying to get the answer. Go ahead and pause the video now. All right, let's go ahead and see what the answer is. It's y is equal to x minus 6 squared minus 21, which makes sense because half of 12 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. So we're going to be subtracting 36 from 15. 15 minus 36 would be negative 21. And then when we factor x squared minus 12x plus 36, we do get x minus 6 squared. So that is that part of the answer. So that would be our answer for that one. Okay, so sometimes we have a leading coefficient. So in this problem, which is y equals 3x squared plus 6x minus 17, it's different from the problems that we just worked because we have a number in front of the x squared. We call that number the leading coefficient. So we cannot just ignore the 3. We had to treat this problem very special when we complete the square. It's a little different. There's different steps that we have to use. So here are the steps when dealing with leading coefficients. Step 1 is kind of similar to step 1 of the other steps. We're going to still group the x squared term and the x term together, and then we're going to factor out the leading coefficient. Step 2, we are going to go ahead and do the completing the square process. We're going to take half of b and square it, and we're going to add it inside the parentheses. So that part is exactly like the steps that we've already learned. Now here comes the super tricky part. We are really adding this number inside the parentheses times the leading coefficient number. So when we do the subtraction part of this problem, we're not just subtracting what we put inside the parentheses, but we're subtracting that number times the leading coefficient. Step 3, we're going to factor inside the parentheses since it is now a perfect square. It'll come out really nice for us. And then step 4, simplify as necessary. So let's look at this problem. Y equals 3x squared plus 6x minus 17. So step 1, I went ahead and I grouped my x squared term and my x term together inside parentheses. That's what I did right there. Now, step 2, I have to factor out my leading coefficient. So my leading coefficient is a 3, so that's going to be factored outside the parentheses. So 3 goes into 3 once, leaving x squared here, and then 3 goes into 6 twice, leaving 2x here. I can go ahead and check my work and make sure that if I distribute the 3 back, if I still get my answer. So 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times 2x is 6x. So it does work. So I did factor that correctly. And then I go ahead and have bring the minus 17 down. Okay. Now, step 2 is where I complete the square. So I'm going to take half of 2. Half of 2 is 1. And then I'm going to square it. Well, 1 squared is 1. So that's what I'm going to add inside the parentheses. I'm going to put plus 1. Now, here's the tricky part. Remember, I'm not just adding 1, but I'm adding 1 times the leading coefficient, which was 3. So 1 times 3 is 3. So when I subtract over here, I'm not just going to have to subtract a 1, but I'm actually going to have to subtract a 3. So it is going to be minus 3 tagged on at the end. Okay, now step 3, I go ahead and factor what's inside the parentheses. Because we did the completing the square process, we know that it's going to give us a perfect squared. It's going to give us x plus 1 squared. We notice that I still have my leading coefficient on the outside. And you might have guessed it, but that is our a value right there. Now, step 4 is to go ahead and simplify. Negative 17 minus 3 becomes negative 20. So now you see I have an a value of 3, an h value of negative 1. Remember, it's the opposite. An h value of negative 1 and a k value of negative 20. All right, let's do another example. So in this example, I have y is equal to negative x squared plus 8x minus 7, or sorry, plus 17. And you might, well, this looks pretty easy. However, this has a leading coefficient. It has a leading coefficient of negative 1. Remember, that's an invisible 1 right there. So we have a leading coefficient of negative 1, which means that we have to use our special steps now. So step 1, I'm going to group my x squared term, and my x term together in parentheses, which is what I did here. Negative x squared plus 8x is now in parentheses. Now I'm going to factor out my leading coefficient. So I'm going to factor out that negative 1, which means that negative 1 divided by negative 1 becomes positive 1, leaving me with x squared for this term. And then 8 divided by negative 1 becomes negative 8. So now I have minus 8x there. And I can check to make sure I factored right by going backwards. Negative times x squared is negative x squared. Negative times negative 8x does become positive 8x. So I can check and make sure that I am factoring correctly. And then, of course, the plus 17 is going to go ahead and be brought down as well. Step 2 is the completing the square process. So half of 8 is 4, and then 4 squared is 16. 16. So it's important to remember that I'm not just adding 16, but I'm adding 16 times my leading coefficient, which is negative. So I'm adding negative 16 to this part of my equation, which means if I'm adding negative 16 here, that means I need to subtract negative 16, and to subtract negative 16, that's really adding. So I have a plus 16, plus 16. So now I can go ahead and do step 3, which is factor my parentheses. I know that it's going to give me a perfect square. It's going to give me x minus 4 squared. Notice that my leading coefficient is still there, the negative right there. Step 4, I'm going to simplify. 17 plus 16 becomes 33. So now I have an a value of negative 1. I have an h value of 4. And then I have a k value of 33. All right, your turn. Go ahead and look at this problem. Y equals 3x squared plus 6x plus 21. Take some time, work it out, do the steps. It is going to need special steps because it has a leading coefficient. And see if you can't find the correct answer, and then check your work after you've unpaused the video. All right, so the answer should be y equals 3 times x plus 1 squared plus 18. Go ahead and move on. Here's another example. Y equals negative 4x squared plus 16x minus 11. Go ahead and try this one on your own to see if you can get the correct answer. So your leading coefficient here is that negative 4. So the correct answer here would be option 3, y equals negative 4 times x minus 2 squared plus 5. All right, that is it for this lesson 5.4. I do expect when I look at your notes that you attempted those multiple choice questions and that you have work shown. If you just wrote the question and the answer, you are going to get points deducted from your homework grade. So make sure that you are attempting those example problems. That's it for this homework assignment. When we meet in class again, we will do more problems and more practice. So I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I will see you next week.